I'm just going to share my screen to show you my PowerPoint, and then I hope you all have your studded leather belts ready and are about to bang your heads, because I'm about to take you on a journey into the world of talking metal. Let's just get this going. Right. So first of all, one might ask what Tolkien and heavy metal have to do with each other. And what I'm going to do here is answer a number of questions, namely, what is Tolkien metal? How do the Finnish band Battlelore adapt Tolkien? How do we explain this adaptation? And what is an enchanted zone? So first of all, heavy metal is often associated with darkness, church burning, Satan worshipping, and that is also partially correct. Now, there are two types of Tolkien metal. In the beginning of the 1990s and to the mid-1990s, we saw a short wave, or quite a wave actually, of death and black metal bands naming themselves after the darkest places in Tolkien's geography. These bands include Gorgoroth from 1992, formed in Norway, Amon Amarth from Sweden, also formed in 1992, although they rather quickly turned to Viking iconography instead. And we also have Austrian band Summoning, whose first three albums are called Lubburs, Minas Morgul, and Dol Guldur from 1995 and 1996. So in other words, quite a lot of celebrating darkness in this one. Perhaps most infamously, we have Norwegian Varg Vikernes, who looks like this, in his guise with the artist name Count Grishnackh. Now, Vikernes based one of his bands, Burzum, or Darkness, in Black Speech, and several of his songs on Tolkien's writings, not to mention that he took, well, the stage name Count Grishnackh, naming himself after arguably the most vile and devious orc that Tolkien created. I reread the parts where Merry and Pippin encounter Grishnackh, and he almost comes across as a rapist in those scenes where he tries to find the ring. Vikernes is probably one of the most infamous people of the metal scene, as a convicted murderer, arsonist, and at the very least an associate of far-right extremist and neo-Nazi groups. Nevertheless, in this paper, I'm going to look, well, less at the darker aspects of Tolkien metal, because I'm going to focus on the Finnish band Battlelore, who look like this from their third album, Third Age of the Sun. Now, Battlelore was originally founded in 1999 by guitarist Jyri Vavanen, whom you can see right there on the left. And between 2002 and 2011, they released 6 albums before going on a hiatus, which since then has only been interrupted by infrequent live appearances. From the very beginning, the Tolkien influence is clearly visible. Their first album was called Where the Shadows Lie, of course, after a part of the inscription on the One Ring. The album cover for Where the Shadows Lie is a painting from Ted Nasmith depicting the fight between Morgoth and Fingolfin. And as you can see here, Morgoth is portrayed in a highly demonic looking way. At first glance, everything here seems to be just as sinister as some of the examples I gave you before from black metal. For instance, the band's original drummer took the moniker Gorthaur after the Sindarin name for Sauron. And their second demo was called Dark Fantasy. A closer look reveals that Battlelore are slightly more difficult to define, both in terms of music and lyrics. Regarding their metal subgenre, it is unusually hard to pigeonhole Battlelore. The band's vocals mostly include the harsh growls, or Cookie Monster vocals, if you will, so often associated with death metal, but accompanied by almost ethereal female vocals typical of symphonic metal, with clean male vocals used intermittently. The music itself is obviously guitar, riff-driven, and often fast-paced, but frequently with a generally upbeat sound, not least because of an emphasis on the use of keyboards and synthesizers. That a flute is occasionally added, which would normally happen in folk metal, only makes the picture murkier and underlines how the music of Battlelore is quite a genre-bending concoction. Unlike the deliberately brutal style of black and death metal, sound and the subject matter found here points towards what we call power metal. Yet, as a general rule, power metal does not use harsh vocals, and battlelore tend to be less focused on guitar solos and harmonies than traditional power metal bands such as Hammerfall and Blind Guardian. The combined Beauty and the Beast approach of their vocals could be an indicator of gothic metal, but once again, music is too upbeat for this, while not being quite symphonic enough to be comparable to symphonic metal giants like Nightwish and Within Temptation. The band themselves seem aware of the difficulties of pinpointing their genre and have referred to their music as fantasy metal. Now, the reason why I bring this up is not to dive into the heated subgenre discussions so typical of the metal community, but because the band's lyrics also are quite multifaceted and present many different points of view. Now, the available space of this paper does not give me the chance to analyze every single song from Battlelore, so I decided to narrow it down to 3 songs from their second album, Sword Song, from 2003. You've already seen this picture by Ted Nasmith, incidentally, of Turin slaying Glaurung. Already here we see more color, a bit more positive approach to everything. 2003, when Sword Song was released, is of course the height of the Tolkien craze generated by the Lord of the Rings movies, and it also seems to be the band's most ambitious period, including an appearance at the RingCon convention in Bonn in Germany and the release of their only DVD called The Journey. But mostly Sword Song displays quite an interesting diversity in their songs. And I'm just going to show you right here the list of songs from the normal version of the album. And as you can see, most songs are quite readily recognizable from the Tolkien legendarium. The songs, as you can see from the titles, often tend to focus on warfare. They mostly span the First and Third Ages, and they display more than just a passing knowledge of the stories of Middle-earth. For instance, if you look at track number 10, Fort Height, it shows an awareness of the triple meanings of the word Orthanc, while the Mark of the Bear, the third track, refers to the Beornings as Yavanna's child, tying together 2 entities both closely associated with nature. Combined, this indicates far more than just having watched the Peter Jackson movie or a cursory reading of The Lord of the Rings. As an aside, Battlelore's third album, Third Age of the Sun, features songs about the 2 blue wizards, specifically naming them Alatar and Palando. Apparently, Jyri Vavanen, who is the guitarist and main lyricist of Battlelore, has even read Unfinished Tales, at least heavily restated. Heart. So obviously the inspiration is quite clear. Now, to return to Sword Song, I have chosen to analyze, or give you a brief analysis at least, of these 3 highlighted songs: Buccaneers Inn, Attack of the Orcs, and The War of Wrath. I'm mostly going to focus on which group in Middle-earth the listener is supposed to identify with, because identification is a very common trope in metal music. So, Buccaneers Inn is characterized by an unusually upbeat atmosphere even by Battlelore standards, with the keyboards providing almost sea shanty-like associations. Well, the song is quite nautical, since it is about one of the minor villainous factions of Middle-earth, the Corsairs of the Haven of Umbar. It's a very romanticized view of pirates, which you can see in this quote right here. Open your barrels, bring me your finest wine. Where are the women? Your heroes have arrived. No sleep tonight, my friends. It's time for the pleasures. Now, it is noteworthy that the unnamed speaker of the song is in the first person and accordingly tells everything from the Corsair's point of view. This literary technique invites the listener to identify with the pirates, perhaps even more so when the speaker comes across as tough, confident, and boastful, if somewhat stereotypically masculine and a bit sexist in these lines. Speaking of gender, it should also be noted that female singer Kaisa Yuki chimes in with a few lines about wanting to dance, drink, and sin afterwards. The overall impression of the Corsairs is clearly meant to be positive, even when they boss around their slaves, attack the shores of Gondor, or with the lyrics actually attempting to explain their desire to celebrate. Fill my mug, I just want to forget all the troubles and fighting and the ghosts in my head. In these lines, the Corsairs appear in a nearly sympathetic light as PTSD-struck warriors wishing to drown their sorrows and feelings of regret. Nevertheless, this feeling quickly passes as the already mentioned lines about dancing and drinking appear, and the chorus repeats, "Tonight we will celebrate." As anyone who has had the chance to look at songs for the philologists will hopefully agree, Tolkien was no stranger to celebratory drinking songs, but this portrayal of the Corsairs does seem to be quite far from what he intended, especially as it takes the side of the antagonists. Unlike Buccaneers Inn, Attack of the Orcs is not told from the point of view of any villain. In terms of pronouns, the orcs are defined as our enemies, and they are always referred to as they, showing no intention of identification on behalf of the listener. Instead, the song seems to be a warning or calls to arms to the free folk of Middle-earth, as seen in these lines following the second verse, sung by clean male vocals. "Men of Gondor, elves of Lothlorien, dwarves from the north, now be strong. Keep your lines and hold on tight. Prepare your weapons and strike." The use of the second person, your, twice, the imperative, and the exclamation marks emphasizes how this is a direct address in a dire situation. Hope is fading, which is seen a few lines later when the defenders are told to feel no fear, just pray. A closer look at the aggressively growled chorus reveals why it is so vital for these peoples to defend themselves against the savage onslaught of the orcs. And this is the chorus. "They shall raze your villages, destroy your camps, rape your cattle, and slaughter your wives." I'll come back to that line. "Under the darkness they shall arrive. Hear the screams, prepare for war. Black skin, sharp teeth, bestial eyes, perverted mind. There's no one like their kind. No mercy, no prisoners. Death is their way. With fire and steel they will slay." In particular, the second line here seems really grotesque with the deliberate switch of the verbs rape and slaughter, underlining just how degenerate, dangerous, and inhuman the orcs are. No propagandist could write this in a better way. In addition, it is impossible to ignore how black skin is simply lumped together with all of the horrendous examples of orcish behavior. Of course, especially in The Lord of the Rings, non-white appearance tends to be associated with something evil, such as the swart, slant-eyed Isengarders, and the sallow skin and sly, slanting eyes of Bill Ferny's Southerner friend, or the fighters from Far Harad described as black men like half-trolls with white eyes and red tongues. This begs the question, should Attack of the Orcs be interpreted as an appropriation of Tolkien, as a statement or warning against non-European immigration in the early noughties? After all, the 1990s had seen right-wing politics gain ground in the Nordic countries, with several populist political parties formed, including the True Finns in Finland. The years following 9/11-2001 only saw an exacerbated anti-immigration discourse, and lately Finland has been the birthplace for several far-right groups, for instance the Soldiers of Odin. Nevertheless, I have found no ties between the members of Battlelore and any far-right groups, and in an interview, Varvanen flatly denies that they have any political messages at all, for what it's worth. Patrick Menander, who was the lead singer on Sword Song and left the band shortly afterwards, was also involved with the band Nazi Paska, which literally translated from Finnish means Nazi shit. Nazi Paska are deliberately comedic, and in 2017, they put a picture of several members of Soldiers of Odin on one of their most ridiculous songs. It is possible that the problematic line about black skin was not explicitly intended to be perceived as racist, and the inclusion of it does seem like an anomaly when compared to the lyrics of the band's numerous other songs. During a softer part towards the end of Attack of the Orcs, a brief thought does speculate about how tortured the existence of an orc must be. What kind of evil they have seen can't imagine the pain they feel. Nevertheless, the chorus is then repeated, and just like in Buccaneers Inn, we return to the main focus of the song as the orcs strike once again. Darkness takes center stage here, but unlike in black metal, this is not something to be celebrated. The final example, the War of Wrath, is quite a contrast to the two others, as it concerns itself with the combined forces of light and goodness finally defeating Morgoth towards the end of the First Age. This epic battle is described as guardians of the world, gods of justice and light, came and defeated the master of disharmony. In other words, order is restored to the realm and everything is set right once more. Unlike the two first songs, there are no first-person pronouns here. The host of the Valar are referred to in the third person, whereas Attack of the Orcs used the same literary device to create a distance and underline the inhumanity of the orcs, here it serves to emphasize the otherworldliness of the armies of light. The listener is not meant to identify with these awe-inspiring beings, as they are portrayed in a verse sung twice by soft female vocals and accompanied by a musical crescendo. All ablaze by the glory of their arms, swell of the trumpets filled the sky, Morgoth banished from the Middle Earth, his reign never shall rise again. The impression given here is joyful, proud, and triumphant. Good has vanquished evil in glorious fashion, unlike the worship of chaos found in black metal. While this point of view of the struggle between good and evil may be interpreted as a more optimistic version of the one found in Attack of the Orcs, it is most certainly at odds with the romanticized and sympathetic portrayal of the Corsairs of Umbar. Showing the story from such vastly different sides and celebrating both heroes and villains is a general trait of Battlelore, which begs the question, how is it possible to skip back and forth between so dissimilar angles when adapting the worlds of Tolkien? And I believe the answer lies in this, the enchanted zone. The enchanted zone is a term that was originally coined by Swedish anthropologist Lotten Gustafsson after her studies of the medieval week on Gotland, which is an annual occasion. She noted that when people dressed up and attended this week, they would enter what she calls a play chronotope, from chronos and topos, meaning, of course, a time and place. And this is the time and place where other rules apply. We let down our guard, subconsciously we act differently because we know it is just a game, and doing this allows us to cover elements that are not usually allowed. Within this time and place, we can do pretty much everything because we all agree on an often unsaid statement. We're just playing. And when that is over, we return to normal life, probably a bit happier than before we started playing. Perhaps unsurprisingly, several members of Battlelore come from a role-playing background or attend live-action role-playing. The booklet accompanying their first album not only included photos of the band members in costume, which you have an example of right here, but also gave them individual Middle-earth character names along with typical role-playing traits such as race, profession, and weapon. This may explain why their lyrics are able to move quickly from one point of view from one song to the next. It is a temporary mask, removed once the song or performance is over, and then you move on to a new role in the game, which all makes sense within the make-believe of the play chronotope. In addition, Varg states that one of the band's goals is to inspire the listener and kindle their imagination, as he says. If you listen carefully, you can see yourself in the Tolkien's Middle-earth riding a white horse on the green fields of Rohan. This sort of escapism and feeling of empowerment is quite typical for several metal subgenres, including power metal, which Battlelore resembles in several ways. In that way, heavy metal in itself becomes a kind of fantasy, giving the participant the opportunity to dream themselves away into a different world that is, and I'm just going to steal Tolkien's words here, wide and deep and high and filled with many things, where one might count himself fortunate to have wandered. Metal lyrics should not necessarily be taken at face value, especially regarding violence and warfare. Just like most video games and many aspects of role-playing, heavily emphasizing the martial aspects tends to be a means to focusing on the action leading to that feeling of temporary empowerment, not necessarily a goal in itself. The vast majority of metal, and fantasy for that matter, consumers are perfectly aware that when the music stops, the concert ends, the last page of the book is turned, the costumes are removed, the end credits roll, or the game is completed, you leave the enchanted zone. The problem arises when some, like the black metal example such as Vikernes in the beginning of this paper, do not return to normal life. As Gustafsson said, with a hint of a warning, you cannot live in an enchanted zone. Varg from Battlelore was once asked how he thought Tolkien would have reacted to the music of Battlelore, to which he rather honestly replied with a laugh, "Oh my God, I think he wouldn't like it." This is probably true, although Tolkien might have appreciated that Battlelore managed to weave the Finnish language into several of their songs. It is also worth noting that although Tolkien was no role player in the modern sense, he understood the concept of enchanted zones and could readily dress up as an axe-wielding Anglo-Saxon warrior and chase his neighbor, or turn a lecture room into a mead hall in which he was the bard and we were the feasting, listening guests, to quote one of his former students. In the wide world of adapting Tolkien, Battlelore is probably only a footnote, but Tolkien metal has its part to play alongside video and tabletop games along with role-playing to remind us that the legacy of J.R.R. Tolkien keeps taking on its own, sometimes wildly independent life as Middle-earth continues to inspire and fascinate. To quote the signature song of German power metal giants Blind Guardian, whose 1998 concept album Nightfall in Middle-earth was based on the Silmarillion and has received its fair share of attention, "They're always in my mind. These songs of hobbits, dwarves and men, and elves, come close your eyes, you can see them too." And then I will finish everything here with a final example of music and adapting Tolkien, one of my favorite memes. And that was it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Brian. A very different take on the idea of adapting Tolkien as well. So thank you so much. The idea of kind of like going into the culture behind the different forms of metal, the different ways that Tolkien has been adapted by different groups as well. It's just really, really interesting to get that alternative approach. So thank you very much for sharing that with us today. Okay, so question time. Now, we are aware that a couple of people would like to ask questions, but don't have the capacity to say it out loud. So if you would like to share a question verbally, please raise your hand. Alternative, please use the Q&A if you would like to share a written question. Please do not use the chat because that's kind of like streaming by too quickly. So please use the Q&A or raise your hand if you'd like to ask Brian a question.
It's quite normal for a teacher, the awkward silence when you wait for a question from the...
You know what, I'm a teacher as well. I can sympathise very strongly. Excellent. Okay, we have a... oh, you know what, as soon as we say that, 2 questions. Okay, so first one's from Maria. So, Maria, you've just got to unmute and then it's over to you.
Hi, do you listen to me?
Yeah.
First, I thought that the topic was very amazing. I never thought that I was going to encounter this topic in this conversation. So thank you very much for putting in the topic in the table. I was wondering, I know that Tolkien was offered by the Beatles to adapt his works, and I was wondering, do you think that metal would be like good for adapting like the Silmarillion? Because, for example, usually, as we saw in the other presentation, which it was great too, I am really enjoying this seminar. But I was wondering, do you think that metal is more, I don't know how to explain it, like more a better option for adapting Tolkien because of the music instruments, because of the force that the music has, or just the lyrics? I was wondering that.
Well, very interesting question. I think it boils down to which subgenre of metal we're looking at here. I mean, if you look up the band Burzum by Varg Vikernes, you will find tracks called The Crying Orc, and in Norwegian, En ring til å herske, which means one ring to rule. And that sort of brutal sound, I'm not sure that really fits. If you look at something like power metal or symphonic metal, which has that sort of crescendo thing going, then I think that would work out quite nicely. And as I can see in the chat right now, somebody also suggests folk metal, which is basically, if you don't know it, about how many weird instruments can we put on stage at the same time. So yeah, folk metal, if you go for something medieval and if you go for the really epic sound, then yeah, I think power metal or symphonic metal would work quite nicely. I mean, Blind Guardian from Germany, which I mentioned towards the end, their 1998 album, Nightfall in Middle-earth, tells most of the story of the Silmarillion, interchanging between normal songs in different kinds of modes and atmospheres, and then sort of spoken word elements in between. And I know my hair length sort of gives this away, but I think that works out quite wonderfully.
Thank you.